The scented candle from Target was still warm from the sun in my passenger seat when I walked into my dad's dining room, and I watched my stepmother smile at it until she noticed what I had hidden underneath the lid, and I stayed quiet as something in her face broke. "My name is Quinn. I am safe deposit key," I said. "First Federal." Dad's head lifted. He recognized the name. That bank had been my mom's, long before it was mine. Greer's fingers tightened around the key. "Oh," she said, like she had just remembered something important. "Yes, that makes sense." Dad looked uneasy. Why would Waverly set something up for Greer? Greer touched his wrist gently, the same gesture that used to end every argument before it started. "It's fine," she murmured. "Maybe it's just closure." Closure. She said it like a word that could fold grief into something neat. I smiled, a small, polite smile. "Sure," I said. Closure. That night, I didn't text anyone. I didn't post. I didn't rant to friends. I didn't even cry. I sat at my kitchen table in my apartment and opened my laptop, calm as a person filing a motion. I emailed the attorney my mother had named, the one I had met quietly years ago when I was old enough to understand what counsel meant. I wrote one sentence. She took the bait. Then I turned my phone face down and went to sleep like someone who had already won. The next morning, Greer was ready before I arrived. She met me at the door in a cream blazer with gold buttons, hair perfect, lipstick fresh, like she was going to a meeting that would end with her name on something valuable. Dad insisted on coming, which surprised me. He said he wanted to support Greer, but I saw the strain in his jaw. A part of him knew something was wrong, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. The drive to the bank was quiet. Greer talked anyway, filling the silence with harmless noise. "Do you remember that little Italian place your mother loved?" she said to Dad, voice soft. "We should go sometime. In her honor." Dad nodded without looking at her. His fingers tapped his knee. He looked like a man trying to balance on a floor that had started to tilt. When we walked into First Federal, the manager was there, like a scene already staged. He greeted me warmly, then looked at Greer with professional neutrality. "How can we help you today?" he asked. Greer lifted her chin. "We're here for a safe deposit box. This key was given to me as a gift." The manager's eyes flicked to me. "Just a fraction." "Of course," he said. "May I see your identification?" Greer handed it over with a confident smile. He studied it, then he nodded. "Thank you. And do you have the authorization letter?" Greer blinked. "The key is the authorization." The manager's expression stayed calm, but his tone changed slightly, firmer. "A key grants physical access. It does not establish legal access. We'll need authorization on file." Greer laughed, trying to make it cute. "I'm her family. My husband is her widower." The manager looked at Dad briefly. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it, as if he wasn't sure what he was anymore in this conversation. "I understand," the manager said, "but I must follow the instructions on the account." Greer's smile tightened. "Then show me the instructions." "I can't," he replied. "Not without proper clearance." Greer's cheeks flushed. "This is ridiculous." I finally spoke gently. "Maybe you should let me handle it." Greer turned toward me too fast. "Why would you handle it?" "Because my mother set it up," I said, "and the instructions were written for me." There it was, the crack. Greer stared, then forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Quinn, honey, don't be dramatic. We're all just trying to—" The manager interrupted politely. "Ms. Quinn is listed as the authorized party. If she wishes to access the box, she may." Greer's eyes widened a fraction. Her fingers clenched around her purse strap like it was the only solid thing left. Dad exhaled sharply. "Quinn," he said, voice low. "What is this?" I looked at him. Really looked. His face was lined in ways it hadn't been when my mom died. I saw regret there. I also saw fear, not just of Greer, but of what he might learn about himself. "It's something Mom left," I said. For the moment someone tried to take what wasn't theirs, Greer's voice went icy. "Are you accusing me of something?" I didn't answer the accusation. I asked one small question instead, and I kept my tone calm. "Why were you so scared when you saw that key?" I asked. Greer's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked to Dad, then to the manager, then back to me. Dad looked at her like he'd never seen her before. "Greer," he said quietly. "Why were you scared?" Greer recovered fast. She always did. "I wasn't scared," she snapped too quickly. "I was surprised. And frankly, I don't appreciate being ambushed." I nodded slowly. "Okay." That single word made her pause. People like Greer expect you to argue. When you don't, they lose the script. The manager guided me to the private room. Dad followed. Greer tried to follow too, but the manager held up a hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "Only the authorized party and any designated guests may enter." Greer looked at Dad. "You're my husband," she said. "Sharp now. You can go in." Dad hesitated. Then, to my surprise, he stayed beside me. "I'm going with my daughter," he said. Greer's face changed. Not much, but enough. In the room, the box waited on the table, cold and plain. I inserted the key, turned it, and lifted the lid. The first thing on top was a sealed envelope, thick with writing in my mother's hand. "To the woman who thinks she won." Greer didn't see it. She was outside. But Dad did. He stared at the envelope like it was a ghost. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, short and precise, like my mother had only kept what mattered. It said that she knew. It said she had proof. It said she had preserved it in copies held by counsel. It said that if Greer ever attempted to access anything tied to her estate or private records, the release process would begin automatically. And then my mother wrote the final line. "You can have him. You will never have my child." Dad made a sound, small and broken. He covered his mouth with his hand. I felt my eyes burn, but I kept my voice steady. "There's more," I said, and I slid the folder toward him. He opened it with shaking fingers. Photos, emails, a timeline, names, dates written out in full. The color drained from his face as he read. He started, then stopped, because lying was too heavy now. I didn't comfort him. Not yet. Comfort can be a reward, and he hadn't earned it. "Is it true?" I asked softly. "Did it start before she got sick?" His eyes filled. He nodded once. A tiny motion, but it hit like a car crash. Greer's voice rose outside the door. "What is happening in there?" The manager's calm reply floated in faintly. "Ma'am, you need to wait in the lobby." Dad stood up, unsteady. "Bring her in," he told the manager. The manager hesitated. Dad looked at him with a face I had never seen on my father. A face that didn't ask permission. "Bring her in," he repeated. Greer walked into the room like a storm in a blazer. She took one look at the papers on the table, and her expression flickered. She tried to recover instantly. "This is insane," she said. "This is a setup. Quinn has always been resentful. She's manipulating you." Dad didn't even glance at me. He stared at Greer. "Did you sleep with me while my wife was dying?" he asked, voice quiet. Greer froze just for a second. Then she lifted her chin. "You were lonely," she said. "You were drowning. I helped you." Dad's face twisted in disgust. "You helped yourself." Greer's eyes flashed. "Do you want to throw away our life because of a dead woman's jealousy?" My body went cold at the way she said dead woman. Dad's hand slapped the papers hard. "You called her jealous?" She was dying. Greer's lips parted, and for the first time, the mask slipped far enough that I saw the rage underneath. "She would have died cried anyway, she hissed. At least you didn't have to be alone. Dad stepped back like she had struck him. And then, like a miracle built from careful planning, my mother's attorney walked in. Not dramatic, not loud. Just present, professional, real. Greer's face went blank. Who is that? The attorney introduced herself calmly and placed a thin folder on the table. She explained in simple language that a file had been held in escrow, that copies existed in multiple locations, that a trigger clause had been activated when an unauthorized party attempted access. Greer laughed, sharp and brittle. Attempted access? I was given the key. The attorney nodded. That is part of the evidence. Greer's eyes narrowed. Evidence of what? The attorney didn't accuse. She asked one question, and it landed like a blade. Why did you believe a woman you erased would leave you a gift? Greer opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Dad looked like he might collapse. He sank into the chair, head in his hands. The attorney slid a second envelope toward me. Your mother instructed this be given to you when the truth became undeniable. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to me. Not about Greer, not about Dad, about me. My mother wrote that she was sorry. I would have to learn in pain what she learned in time. She wrote that none of it was my fault. She wrote that I did not owe anyone my silence to keep their comfort intact. Then she gave me one last instruction. Do not burn yourself trying to keep their house warm. Greer's voice snapped me back. So what? She spat. You're going to ruin us? Ruin your father? I looked at her. I thought about the years she stole from me. The way she made me feel like my grief was inconvenient. The way she turned my mother into a shadow and then complained the house felt cold. I stayed calm. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm letting the truth go where it was always supposed to go. Dad lifted his head, eyes red. Quinn, he whispered. Please. That word. Please. He used to say it when he wanted me to accept something I didn't want, but now it sounded smaller, like he finally understood he didn't get to demand anymore. The attorney spoke quietly about next steps, about separation, about representation, about consequences. Greer stood shaking with fury. You think you've won, she said to me, voice trembling. You're just a bitter little girl. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I reached into my bag and placed the candle on the table between us. I got you the scent you like, I said softly. Vanilla. It covers everything, doesn't it? Greer's face twisted. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, heels striking the floor like gunshots. Dad didn't follow her. He stayed in that room with me, surrounded by paper and truth. In the weeks that followed, things happened quietly, the way real consequences do. Lawyers made calls, accounts were frozen. The firm's partners asked questions that could no longer be brushed away with charm. Greer tried to paint herself as a victim, but her own messages, her own words, her own timelines did what my mother knew they would do. They spoke. Dad moved out of the house he had built with my mother and rented a small apartment that felt like a waiting room. He started therapy. He stopped drinking. He called me and apologized without excuses. Over and over, I didn't forgive him quickly. Forgiveness is not a gift you hand out because someone finally feels sorry. But I did something else. I stopped carrying his shame for him. I used the trust my mother had protected. I paid off my student loans. I took a leave from work and applied to a theater program I had once been too afraid to want because wanting things felt dangerous in a house where my needs were always second. When I got accepted, I sat on my apartment floor and cried until my chest hurt. Not from sadness, but from relief. On the first day of classes, I wore my mother's ring on a chain under my shirt, not as a wound, as a promise. Months later, a small package arrived in the mail from First Federal. No return address, just my name in the manager's handwriting. Inside was one last envelope. My hands shook as I opened it because part of me always expected pain to be followed by more pain, but the letter inside was different. It was my mother's handwriting, lighter, as if she had written it on a day when she felt sunlight. She told me she was proud of me for choosing myself. She told me she loved me in every version of time. And then she wrote one final twist, one final gift that made me laugh through tears. She wrote that the candle was her idea. She had written down, years ago, the exact scent Greer always bought for the house because she hated the way it made everything smell the same. My mother ended the letter with a line so simple it felt like a hand on my cheek. I kept my garden gloves. I hope you keep your life. And I did. Now when Mother's Day comes around, I don't buy candles. I don't buy cards that pretend love is automatic. I go outside. I plant something. I let dirt get under my nails. I breathe in a scent that does not need to hide anything. And I remember the moment Greer's face cracked because the woman she tried to erase reached from the grave and reminded her who she never was. Discussion section. Okay, stepping out of the story for a second. Some people don't hurt you with obvious cruelty. They hurt you with control that looks like care. They learn your weak spots. They learn what you will tolerate. Then they slowly make your reality smaller until you're living inside their comfort. And the scary part is how quiet it can be. It's not always screaming. It's tiny corrections. It's subtle guilt. It's being told you're too sensitive. It's being trained to doubt your own instincts. That's why quiet revenge works. Not because revenge is the goal, but because clarity is. When you stop reacting emotionally, the manipulative person loses the steering wheel. They can't hook you with drama. They can't paint you as unstable. They can't distract from the facts. So you collect facts. You keep your tone steady. You let them get overconfident, and you don't expose them to everyone. You show the truth to the right person in the right place at the right time. Also, if you're listening to this and it reminds you of someone in your life, I want you to hear this part clearly. You're not mean for having boundaries. You are not ungrateful for wanting respect. And you are not crazy for noticing patterns that other people pretend not to see. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is not an argument. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is, okay, and then you choose yourself anyway. 24 years old, and I work as a paralegal at a small firm outside Boston. I have handled messy divorces and uglier wills, but nothing prepared me for the way a family can turn into paperwork and still somehow feel like a bruise. That Mother's Day, my dad had insisted on brunch at home. He said it like he was offering peace, like the word home still belonged to all of us. The table was dressed in pale linen, the kind of napkins you cannot stain without getting a lecture. There were tulips in a vase that looked expensive but empty, like it existed only to be seen. My stepmother, Greer, stood at the stove in a silk robe, whisking hollandaise like she was performing for an invisible audience. Her hair was glossy and controlled, pinned back in a way that said she did not sweat, and if she did, it would be tasteful. She turned when she heard my heels and opened her arms with that practiced warmth. Quinn, you made it. I hugged her the way you hug someone at a work event. Light contact, quick exit. She smelled like clean laundry and something floral that reminded me of hotel lobbies. Dad was behind her, cutting fruit. He looked older than he ever admitted. His shoulders slumped in a way that told me the last decade had been heavier than he wanted anyone to know. "I'm glad you're here," he said, meaning it. Today matters. It mattered to him because he needed it to matter. He needed the picture of us to hold still for a few hours, to prove to himself that his choices had not shattered anything permanently. Greer's eyes flicked toward the small gift bag in my hand. White tissue paper, a neat bow, simple, innocent, that was the point. "Oh," she said softly. "You didn't have to." "Yes," I said, and I meant it in a way she could not hear. We ate. We made the right noises at the right moments. Greer complimented the pastries. Dad praised her cooking. I smiled and nodded and kept my hands in my lap so no one would see them tense. Then Greer clinked her glass with a spoon. "I just want to say," she began, her voice bright, "how grateful I am for this family, for the way we have grown together." She looked at me as she said it, like the word together was a charm she could rub until it came true. Dad's eyes got shiny. He reached for her hand. Greer squeezed his fingers and then glanced at my gift again, as if it could confirm her success. "Go on," Dad urged. "Open it." Greer gave a small laugh, a little show of humility, then pulled the gift bag toward her. Tissue paper rustled. The candle appeared first. Cream-colored jar, a label that said something about vanilla and cedar. The kind of thing everyone buys because it feels safe. She smiled. "This is lovely. Open it," I said, keeping my tone light. She twisted the lid. Her nails were perfect, pale pink, never chipped. The lid came off with a soft pop, releasing a sweet smell into the air. Underneath the lid, taped to the inside, was a small metal key, not a house key, not a spare for a diary, a bank key. Greer's smile paused, like a video buffering. Her eyes locked on the key. The color drained out of her face so quickly it looked like someone had turned down a dimmer switch. Dad leaned forward, confused. "What's that?" Greer's fingers trembled as she touched the tape. She tried to hide it by closing the lid, but she was too late. She had already reacted. I watched her carefully. I watched the way her throat tightened. I watched her swallow, and I stayed quiet, because the key was not the real gift. It was the message. The first time I met Greer, I was 12, and I still smelled my mother on everything. My mom, Waverly, had died of melanoma that moved like a fire through dry grass. One month she was rubbing her temples and joking about needing more sleep. The next month she was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. By the time she stopped recognizing our living room, my dad was the one who held her water cup, who spoke gently into her ear, who told her she was safe even when she was slipping away. I remember her funeral more clearly than most of my childhood. The sound of dirt hitting the casket, the way my dad's hands shook when he tried to fold the program, the black dress I wore that still had the tags tucked inside because no one had time to return it. After she died, I started sleeping with one of her old cardigans under my pillow. It smelled like her shampoo at first, then it smelled like dust, then it smelled like nothing. I kept it anyway. A little over a year later, Dad told me we were having dinner with someone important. He said it like he was introducing a client. Greer arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that showed all her teeth. She wore heels even though it was snowing. She complimented our home in a voice that sounded like she was evaluating it, not admiring it. During dinner, she asked me questions, but they were the kind that didn't require real listening. "What do you like to do, Quinn?" I said I like drawing. "That's wonderful," she said, already looking at my dad. "Creativity is so important." When she left, Dad stood at the window and watched her walk to her car like he was afraid she might disappear. "She makes me feel like myself again," he told me. I did not know how to tell him that the man he had been with my mother was the only version I recognized, so I nodded. I tried. Greer moved in within months. She did it with boxes labeled in neat handwriting, like she was organizing a store display. She rearranged the furniture for better flow. She took down our family photos and replaced them with abstract art that looked like expensive nothing. When she found my mother's gardening gloves in a drawer, she held them with 2 fingers like they were dirty. "We should donate these," she said. "We need the space." I watched my dad hesitate, and then I watched him give in. Greer's kindness came wrapped in performance. She bought me gifts that were more about her taste than my interests. She introduced me as our girl to people who never remembered my name. She praised me loudly in public, then corrected me quietly at home. She also did something worse than any insult. She erased my mother without admitting it. If I mentioned Mom, Greer's smile would tighten. "She would want you to move forward," she would say. Like she knew. When I got my first period, it was an internet search and a trembling phone call to my friend that got me through. Greer was out at a fundraiser. Dad was in a meeting. I sat on the bathroom floor dizzy with panic and felt stupid for needing someone who wasn't there. When I had nightmares, our dog Archer crawled under my covers and pressed his warm body against my legs until my breathing slowed. By the time I was 15, I had learned how to survive in my own house by shrinking. Then came the night everything shifted. I got the lead in the school play. It was the first time since my mom died that I felt fully awake. I wanted my dad to see me on that stage, to see that I was still here, still trying. Opening night landed on the same evening as one of Greer's charity galas. She found out and didn't even look up from her phone. "You'll have to skip the play," she said. "The Sterling family will be there. Their son goes to Yale. Connections matter." Dad started to protest, and for a second my heart rose. Then Greer touched his arm. A gentle gesture. A quiet command. Dad's voice softened. "It's just a high school play, Quinn. There will be others." Something inside me went cold. I went upstairs to the closet and pulled out the only thing Greer hadn't claimed because she didn't know it existed. My mother's old recipe binder. It was thick, stained, full of handwritten notes. The cover was worn from years of use. She used to let me lick the spoon after frosting, laughing when I got sugar on my nose. Inside the back pocket of that binder was a small envelope, sealed and hidden so deep you had to be looking for it. I had never opened it. That night, with my mascara streaking down my cheeks, I did. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of the cedar chest where she stored keepsakes. The first lines were warm, loving, the kind of words you read and immediately want to press to your chest. And the tone shifted. It was not anger. It was warning. She wrote about a safe deposit box. She wrote about a key. She wrote one sentence that made my stomach drop so hard I thought I might throw up. She wrote that someone close to us had been waiting for her to disappear. I did not sleep. The next morning, I skipped school for the first time in my life. I took the bus to First Federal, the small brick bank my mother had used since she was young. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the envelope at the counter. The manager looked at me like he'd been expecting me for years. "You're Waverly's girl," he said softly. I nodded, throat tight. He did not ask why I was there. He just led me through a door marked employees only and down into a hallway that smelled like cold metal and paper. "This box was set up with special instructions," he said. "Your mother told us you would come when you were ready." When he opened the vault, rows of boxes gleamed back at me like teeth. He pulled out one box and placed it on the table. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear him explain the procedure. My fingers closed around the key, slid it into the lock. It turned, and right before I lifted the lid, I heard Greer's voice in my head, smooth and confident, saying, "We are a family now. Hold on, tiny break." I read the comments when I'm worn out, and seeing your location reminds me, I'm not telling these stories into an empty room. Like, subscribe, and drop your city, state, or country. Now here's what happened next. I lifted the lid. Inside were folders, neatly labeled in my mother's handwriting, and a small velvet pouch. There was also a sealed letter, thicker than the one in the binder, addressed to me with a steadiness that made my eyes burn. I reached for it first. My hands hovered, then landed on the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. I stared at my name, my mother's handwriting looping across it like she was still alive somewhere, still trying to protect me. Then I slid my finger under the seal, and the first sentence I read made my throat close so fast I couldn't breathe. My mother wrote that she was not leaving me to Greer's version of love. I read that line 3 times, because my brain kept trying to turn it into something softer, something reasonable, something that did not change the shape of my life. But the ink did not move and the truth did not bend. My throat tightened so hard it felt like I had swallowed a stone. The manager asked if I needed water. I shook my head. If I opened my mouth, I knew I would make a sound I could not take back. I forced myself to keep reading. My mother's handwriting stayed calm, almost gentle, but the words underneath were not gentle at all. She explained that months before her diagnosis, she had noticed small things that didn't add up. A receipt in my dad's jacket for a restaurant he never went to. A lipstick mark on a glass he claimed was from a client dinner. A calendar reminder that popped up on the home computer for a firm retreat that mysteriously disappeared the next day. At first, she told herself she was imagining it. She wrote that grief can start before someone even dies, and maybe she was already grieving the life she thought she had. But then she found an email, not on purpose. It was open on my dad's laptop while he showered, and she saw her name written in a subject line with a smiley face next to it. Waverly is getting weaker. She wrote that she stared at that screen until her vision blurred, and she realized someone had been watching her illness like a countdown. She wrote about Greer, not as my stepmother, but as a woman in my dad's orbit. A woman who worked close to him, who knew the firm's clients, who knew what my father wanted to hear when he was tired and scared. My mother wrote that she confronted dad once, quietly late at night while I was asleep. She asked him if there was someone else. She asked him if he was already leaving, even though she was the one dying. He denied it. According to my mother, he denied it with his whole face, like he had practiced. He swore he would never do that to her. He cried. He held her hand. He begged her not to think the worst. And my mother wrote something that made me feel both love and heartbreak at the same time. She wrote that she wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than dying with betrayal in her chest. But her body was failing, and her mind was getting sharper. She started paying attention. She started listening instead of trusting. She wrote that when you are dying, you stop worrying about being polite. You worry about what happens to your child after you are gone. My stomach turned as I read the next section. My mother wrote that she hired a private investigator. She wrote that she felt embarrassed doing it, like she was turning into one of those paranoid people you see in movies. But then she got the photos. Photos of my dad and Greer, not at a work dinner, not in a group, but alone, sitting close, laughing. Greer's hand on his knee, my dad's hand on her waist. Their faces tilted toward each other like they had done it before. The dates on the investigator's notes were from before my mother's diagnosis. I felt cold all over, like my blood had drained out and left my skin behind. I kept reading because my mother's words were the only thing holding me upright. She wrote that she did not tell my father she knew. She wrote that she considered it. She imagined the fight, the shouting, the guilt, but she realized something darker. If she confronted him, he would scramble. He would cover tracks. He would make promises. He would guilt her into silence with tears. And then she would die. And I would be left with a man skilled at rewriting reality. So she stayed quiet. Not because she was weak. Because she was strategic. That word, strategic. My mother. In pain and fear, and still thinking like a chess player. Then, she wrote about the firm. She wrote that Dad's investment firm was not just managing money. It was moving it, shifting it, hiding it. She wrote about Greer's role. How she was in client relations. How she had access to communication, schedules, meetings. How she could smooth over concerns. How she could redirect questions. How she could make rich people feel safe, while their money quietly disappeared into temporary accounts. My mother wrote that she found the truth by accident. File folder left on the printer tray. A client name she recognized from our neighborhood. A number that didn't match the statement Dad had shown at a dinner party to brag about returns. My mother compared documents. She asked one simple question at a doctor's appointment of all places. When a nurse mentioned her husband must be busy with all those lawsuits in the news, then apologized, saying she might have mixed him up with someone else. My mother wrote that she went home and searched quietly, and that was when she realized my father was not just cheating. He was in trouble. The letter explained that she had copied documents. She had saved emails. She had kept a timeline. She wrote that Greer was not simply waiting to marry my dad. Greer was waiting to inherit his position, his social circle, his leverage. Greer's smile was not kindness. It was camouflage. I stopped reading for a moment and stared at the metal table in the bank vault room. My hands were clenched so tight my nails hurt. Thought about the way Greer used to correct how I held my fork at dinner. I thought about the way she transformed my mom's garden into stone and candles. I thought about the way she called me mature, like it was a compliment, when really it was permission for adults to neglect me, and my chest burned with humiliation, because I had been living in a story where I was the difficult one, the grieving one, the girl who couldn't move on. My mother had known. She had known, and she had built something for me anyway. I forced myself to finish the letter. She wrote that she could not change my father. She wrote that she could not undo what he chose, but she could protect me from what came next. She told me the safe deposit box contained 3 things meant for 3 different moments. The first folder was labeled "For Your Future." Inside, she wrote, were trust documents and beneficiary forms. My mother had created a small trust in my name, funded with money from her side of the family, money my father could not touch. She wrote that she did not care if people called it dramatic. She cared that I would never need to ask Greer for permission to live my life. The second folder was labeled "If You Need to Leave." Inside were copies of my birth certificate, my social security card, my passport information, and a list of emergency contacts that were not my father. There was also a note in my mother's handwriting with an address and a name, a woman named Arden. My mother wrote that Arden was her closest friend from college, and that she would take me in, no questions asked, if my home stopped being safe. The third folder made my pulse jump even before I opened it. It was labeled "If He Marries Her." My mouth went dry. My mother wrote that she hoped she was wrong. She hoped Greer would disappear. She hoped my father would come back to himself. But she had learned not to bet my future on hope. Inside that folder were the investigators' photos, a printed timeline, copies of emails with Greer's name in them, and a sealed envelope addressed to someone else. The envelope was not for me. It was addressed to a partner at a law firm in the city, with the words, "To be opened if Quinn requests counsel." That part made me shake. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I did. My mother had set up a door I could walk through when I was ready, and suddenly my grief changed texture. It was no longer just sadness. It was power. It was a key in my hand. I opened the velvet pouch last. Inside was my mother's wedding ring. I held it between my fingers and felt heat behind my eyes. The ring looked small and ordinary, but it was heavy with everything my mother had been, everything she had endured, everything she had planned so I wouldn't be swallowed by someone else's version of the truth. The manager cleared his throat gently. "Do you need a moment, sweetheart?" I nodded, but the moment I needed was not a quiet one. It was a moment where my father looked at me and admitted what he had done. It was a moment where Greer could not smile her way out. I left the bank with the folders in my backpack and the letter pressed against my chest like armor. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window and watched people living ordinary lives. Mothers holding toddler hands, a couple arguing softly near a coffee shop, a teenager rolling her eyes at her dad in a parking lot. I wondered how many of them were standing on top of secrets without knowing. When I got home, Greer's car was in the driveway. She was always home when she wanted to be noticed. I walked in and found her in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, a glass of lemon water beside her like a prop. She looked up and smiled. "School okay?" she asked, as if she cared. I felt the letters weight inside my bag. I felt the ring's cool metal in my pocket. "Fine," I said. Greer studied me for a second. She had a way of examining people like she was checking for cracks. "You seem tired," she said. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I made my face blank, the way I had practiced for years. "Just a long day." She nodded like she believed she had permission to dismiss me. "Well, don't forget, we have the Richardson dinner this weekend. Wear the blue dress. It photographs well." I went upstairs without arguing, and that was my first act of revenge. I did not fight. I did not accuse. I did not cry in front of her. I simply started planning. Over the next months, I became someone Greer underestimated even more than before. I got quieter, more agreeable, more smooth. When she criticized my posture, I said, "You're right." When she told me to skip a rehearsal, I said, "Okay." When she asked about my friends, I gave harmless answers. And while she relaxed, I collected proof. I started paying attention to the mail. I took photos of envelopes with the firm's name and legal addresses. I memorized the way Greer spoke when she thought no one was listening. I watched how my dad's phone screen lit up with messages he tried to hide. One night, I walked past Dad's office and saw a stack of files on his desk. My heart pounded, but my feet kept moving. I did not rush. I did not look guilty. I grabbed a glass of water, paused at the hallway mirror like I was checking my hair, and then continued to my room. I learned something important during those years. Adults like Greer rely on your emotional reaction. If you cry, they call you dramatic. If you yell, they call you unstable. If you stay calm, they start to panic because they can't label you. So I stayed calm. Years later, when I became a paralegal, I understood something else. Paper is not just paper. It is leverage. It is history that cannot be gaslit. And I had a mother who left me history. Fast forward to Mother's Day. Years after that bank vault. Years after I had moved out for college and returned, as an adult who knew how to read documents like weapons, Greer thought she had won. She thought time had covered her footprints. She thought my grief had softened into compliance. That brunch was her stage, her audience, her reward, and the candle in that gift bag was my quiet opening line. Now at the table, Greer stared at the key taped under the lid, and I watched her decide in real time how to play it. She laughed too quickly. "Oh, how funny. Did this come like that?" Dad frowned. "What is it?" I took a sip of my coffee. My hands did not shake. My voice stayed gentle. "It's a key," I said. "It opens something that belongs to you." Greer's eyes flashed, just for a second, a flare of fear. Then she recovered. She turned her smile on my dad like a shield. "Quinn must be doing some kind of sweet scavenger hunt. Isn't that adorable?" Dad looked confused, but he smiled anyway, because he wanted normal more than he wanted truth. Greer reached for the tape again, trying to peel the key off without letting anyone look too closely. I let her, because the key was not the trap. It was the bait. The real gift was waiting in the next step, and she was about to walk into it with her heels on, thinking she was in control. Greer slid the key into her palm like it was a mistake. She could pocket and erase. Her laugh stayed bright, but her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, like she needed distance from me to breathe. "Quinn," she said, still smiling. "This is very thoughtful, but you didn't have to make it complicated." Dad looked from her to me. "Quinn, what is this?" I set my coffee down carefully. I made sure the spoon didn't clink. "Quiet movements make people lean in. It's not complicated," I said. "It's just something I promised I would give her someday." Greer's shoulders lifted a fraction. "Promised who?" I met her gaze. My mom. The air in the room changed. Dad's face softened and tightened at the same time, like a wound being touched. Greer's smile held, but it became thinner, more brittle. "That's sweet," she said quickly. "But your mother and I never—" "Well, we didn't exactly—" "I know," I said. "Not cruel, not loud, just final." Greer stared at me, and for the first time in years, I saw what lived under her polish. Calculation. A quick mental scan for exits. Dad cleared his throat. "Quinn, what does the key open?" Greer answered before I could. "Probably some old box of memories," she said with a light little shrug, as if she was the reasonable one. "Your mother liked dramatic gestures. It's fine, really." My dad flinched at the word dramatic. He didn't correct her. He rarely corrected her, not in the moments that mattered. I leaned back slightly, letting a beat of silence sit on the table. "I can drive you to the bank tomorrow," I said to Greer. "If you want." Her eyes sharpened. "The bank? It's